Last week, White House Trade Counselor Peter Navarro walked into the Council on Foreign Relations and delivered a declaration of war against the British Empire's control over American policy. And a few days later, Donald Trump signed a rare earth minerals deal with Australia that the mainstream media is telling you is aimed at China. But here's what they're not telling you. That deal is really aimed at dismantling Britain's centuries-old imperial grip on Australia and spreading Trump's America First dominance. Now, not a lot of attention was paid to Navarro's CFR speech. It's just another speech about tariffs and bringing back manufacturing. And as far as Trump's Australia deal, the talking heads will tell you that this is all about challenging China over critical materials. But that misses the deeper strategic reality. The CFR confrontation and the Australia deal are not separate moves. They're two coordinated strikes in the same war against the British imperial system. When you connect these two developments with what's been happening since Trump's return to power, the Mideast peace breakthrough, his challenge to Europe's perpetual war policies, his confrontation with the Fed, a clear strategy emerges. I'm Susan Kokinda, and since the end of the Bretton Woods system in 1971, I've tracked how the British Empire and the City of London reasserted control over the world economy, rebranding it as globalism. And what we're witnessing right now is the first real challenge to that imperial system in the entire post-war era. Most people, including a lot of Trump supporters, often miss the forest for the trees. If you understand how important it is to get above the trees, please like and subscribe so that we can build our audience and more people will see the forest. So today I'm going to show you how two recent developments reveal Trump's grand strategy. First, why Peter Navarro's speech to the CFR was actually a declaration of war against British control over American policy and the institutions that have enforced it. And second, why Trump's rare earth deal with Australia is aimed primarily at Great Britain and not China. And by the end of this video, you'll understand the real war that's being fought and why the British elite are more terrified now than they have been at any point since the American Revolution. Peter Navarro didn't just give a speech at the Council on Foreign Relations. He marched into one of the most powerful institutions of British imperial control in the United States and punched them right in the nose.
I'd like to thank the Council on Foreign Relations for this kind invitation. After all, it's not every day I get to speak before an audience that has opposed nearly every policy I've ever helped advance in the White House. But let's be honest with each other. CFR has been uniformly anti-tariff and anti-Trump and highly skeptical of an America First foreign policy that, in truth, is restoring our trade balance, rebuilding our industrial base, strengthening alliances like NATO, keeping, and as we just saw in the Middle East, negotiating the broader peace, and reasserting American sovereignty on the world stage.
Navarro accused the CFR of embodying an ideology that is, quote, comfortably wedded with Wall Street and the multinational corporations that love open borders, cheap offshore labor, and an endless stream of subsidized imported goods. Now, what made this speech even more enjoyable is that the CFR's current president, Michael Froman, was sitting right in front of Navarro. Froman was Barack Obama's trade negotiator and negotiated the infamous Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Navarro went scorched earth on.
Then came the Trans-Pacific Partnership, forgive me here, Mike. CFR sold it as a geopolitical rampart against a rising China, yet the TPP would have surrendered much of America's manufacturing base, including our crucial auto and auto parts sectors, to Japan, Vietnam, and ironically, ultimately, China itself. President Trump saw this very clearly and tore up the TPP on day one. I was standing right behind him on that beautiful day. This is what the Council on Foreign Relations has never understood. Weakening our industrial base has never strengthened our strategic position. It has only invited aggression. That's why in Trump world, we do not trade off economic security for national security. We believe economic security is national security. Memo to CFR, you cannot project power if you surrendered production. You cannot deter aggression when your supply chains run through your opponent's ports. You can't lead the free world if you can't make what the free world needs.
Now, I'll give Navarro a diplomatic pass when he says that the CFR has never understood. They understand exactly what they're doing. Because the Council on Foreign Relations is a creation of the British Round Table, founded in 1922 to smother the American tradition in economics and foreign policy and to bring the United States back into the British imperial fold. Coming out of World War I, the Round Table spawned two organizations. The British arm, known as the Royal Institute for International Affairs, and it's commonly known as Chatham House. I want you to remember that name. And then in 1922, the CFR, its American arm. The CFR's mission, to bring the United States back into alignment with imperial policy after we had strayed too far after that unfortunate thing called the American Revolution. And the British were largely successful. Most presidents just obeyed. But the presidents who bucked it got assassinated, shot at, Watergated, or couped. Now, one of the things that makes Promethean action so unique is that we have exposed the British hand in all of this. We wrote the ebook, It's the British Who Murder Our Presidents, and we don't just use brand names like Deep State. We look at the historical and philosophical underpinnings of this fight between the British Empire and the American Republic and how it plays out in economics, statecraft, and culture. Now, a significant part of Navarro's speech focused on America's supply chain vulnerabilities in strategic materials. Navarro contrasted Trump's economic nationalism with the globalists' free trade dogma, as he called it, the same dogma that's made the world dangerously dependent on Chinese processing of rare earths. Now, most people will stop there and think, okay, so this is about challenging China and bringing manufacturing back to America. Well, that's true, but it's not the deeper story. Because a few days after Navarro delivered that speech, Donald Trump gave a demonstration of exactly how he's replacing the British model with the American system. And that's where the Australia deal comes in, but probably not for the reasons you think. When President Trump met with Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in the Oval Office on Monday and signed an $8.5 billion deal to process rare earths and strategic minerals in Australia, the establishment media is focused on that agreement as a counter to China. But I'm going to show you what nobody else is telling you. This deal is a precision strike against British imperial control. Let's start with what the Australian Prime Minister said, because tucked away in his comments in the Oval Office is a key to understanding what's really happening.
Australia has had a view for some time, a bit similar to putting America first.
Right.
Our plan's called A Future Made in Australia, which is about not just digging things up and exporting them, but how do we make sure that we have across the supply chains with our friends being able to benefit, seize those opportunities. So we certainly see part of what this is about isn't just digging things up, it's also about processing, including the joint ventures between Australia and the United States.
Did you catch that phrase? Quote, not just digging things up and exporting them, but processing them. And joint industrial ventures between the United States and Australia in Australia. In other words, Donald Trump is offering Australia a partnership based on mutual industrial development, not just imperial extraction. So why is that important? Well, here's a good example. Australia is the world's largest lithium producer, 52% of the global supply, but it produces almost none of it. They dig it up, ship it to China, and then buy back the batteries at a huge markup. Now, China's been kind of late to this game, but this is what the British have been doing for centuries, using political or economic control to extract raw materials, stifle industrial development, and keep countries perpetually dependent on foreign manufacturing. I think that's why we fought the American Revolution. Australia has been in this paradigm, though, for more than 150 years, and for most of that time, It hasn't been the Chinese doing it. In fact, the British have been pretty brutal when it comes to keeping Australia in its place as a raw materials producer. Let me tell you what happened 50 years ago, the last time an Australian Prime Minister tried to exert economic sovereignty over Australian resources. Because what happened to Gough Whitlam in 1975 is key to understanding why this Trump deal is so threatening to London. Australia's natural resources were owned by British mining companies like Rio Tinto Zinc, BHP, and other Anglo-Dutch corporations, which were all intertwined with the British monarchy and the elites. Prime Minister Whitlam had a plan for, quote, resource nationalism, unquote, to give Australia control over its natural resources, to process them in Australia, and to use that wealth for the benefit of Australians. He was also looking to the Mideast to independently finance this, which didn't make the City of London very happy. So the empire struck back. In November 1975, the Crown-appointed Governor General, Sir John Kerr, did the unprecedented. He dismissed the democratically elected prime minister and unilaterally installed the opposition leader as caretaker. Tens of thousands protested in the streets, but it didn't matter, because Sir John had used the reserved powers of the Crown to remove a prime minister who threatened British imperial control of Australia's resources. So Donald Trump just offered Australia exactly what Whitlam tried to do: industrial development and economic sovereignty. But here's the difference. Whitlam was trying to do it alone in Australia. Trump is offering American partnership and investment in Australia as part of a broader strategy to dismantle British financial control. Britain can't use the Governor General to fire the President of the United States. They've certainly tried other means: impeachments, the 2020 election, lawfare, assassinations. But because we're a constitutional republic and not a British satrap, they've failed. And now they can't stop Australia from accepting American partnership instead of British extraction. Now, there's one more fun fact tying all of this together. During yesterday's Oval Office press session, Trump was asked about Australia's current ambassador to the United States, Kevin Rudd, who had previously called Trump, quote, the most destructive president in American history, a village idiot, and a traitor to the West. Trump shot back publicly in the Oval Office, I don't like you either, and I probably never will. Now, I hope you're not surprised when I tell you that Ambassador Rudd is a senior advisor at Chatham House, the sister organization to the CFR that Navarro just eviscerated. Trump and his team are systematically confronting the institutional network of British imperial control. So let's connect all the dots. Navarro walks into the CFR and declares their era of policy control is over. 3 days later, Trump signs a deal that restructures Australia's economic relationship away from British imperial extraction and toward American industrial partnership. These aren't separate tactical moves. They're coordinated strikes in the same strategic war. So if you want to have a general's view of the battlefield, you should join Promethean Action's community. Become a paying member or make a contribution so you can build the political army that will execute Trump's policies. Because every move that Trump makes in the Mideast, with Russia or China, on tariff and industrial policy, or against the Federal Reserve, is aimed at dismantling the modern-day British Empire and establishing a world dominated by sovereign nations. The British elite understand exactly what's happening. That's why we have Antifa in the streets, and Democrats shutting down the government, and neocons on both sides of the Atlantic trying to keep their wars going. Yes, the empire is fighting back, but for the first time in 80 years, they're on the defensive. So join the offense, along with us and with Donald Trump. This has been your midweek update. Thanks for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at prometheanaction.com.